The day's weight loosens gently from your shoulders as Edgar Cayce's quiet story begins. Your breathing softens. You are resting now, settled within the familiar comfort of a dim room where the world outside has finally grown quiet. Perhaps you feel the warmth of a heavy blanket or the simple texture of the fabric beneath your hands as they find a place of complete rest. It is a place where time slows down and the only thing that matters is the quiet rhythm of the present. There is nothing that needs to be decided tonight, and the many questions of the day can remain safely unanswered while you listen. Before he was known as a prophet, Edgar was a soft-spoken photographer and a devoted Sunday school teacher. He was a husband and a father who lived a life of quiet routines and gentle expectations in the rolling hills of Kentucky. People came to know him not as a man of spectacle, but as someone who could answer the deepest questions of the human heart while lying in a state of sleep. Some believed he could perceive things far beyond the reach of the senses, while others remained uncertain. But we are not here to settle those mysteries tonight. We are simply following the human life beneath the title of the sleeping prophet. As you lie here, you might imagine Edgar himself resting on a simple couch many years ago. His hands are folded gently across his stomach, and his own breathing has become slow and rhythmic as the room grows dim. You can almost hear the unhurried sound of his breath as it matches your own in this moment of stillness. The house around him begins to fade, and the modern world dissolves into the soft farmland of 19th century Kentucky. The air smells of turned earth and summer clover as the fields stretch toward the horizon in the fading light of a simpler time. The questions are resting for now. Everything is peaceful. The journey begins in the soft light of the morning. Edgar was born on a quiet Tuesday in March of 1877, while the Kentucky air was still holding the crisp memory of winter. The farm near the small community of Beverly was a world of weathered wooden fences and the deep, rich smell of turned earth as his father, Leslie, worked the fields under a wide and patient sky. It was a place where the seasons dictated the rhythm of every day, and the arrival of a new child was woven into the steady pattern of chores and church and the changing light. Edgar Cayce held her son in the quiet of their home as the wind whispered through the trees outside. The world was small and safe. As the years passed, Edgar grew into a slender and serious boy who seemed to find a particular comfort in the stillness of the countryside. He walked the dusty roads between the fields of tobacco and corn while the afternoon sun warmed the back of his neck and the sound of cicadas rose and fell in the tall grass. His hands became familiar with the textures of rural life as he helped with the morning chores or sat on the smooth wooden benches of Liberty Church. The interior of the church was always cool and smelled of old paper and beeswax while the sunlight slanted through the windows in long, dusty beams. He listened to the hymns and the sermons of the disciples of Christ's tradition, and he felt a deep and quiet connection to the words of the Bible. It was a book that he began to read with a devotion that went beyond his years. He sat in the shade of the old trees for hours and let the stories of the prophets and the ancient lands fill his mind while the world around him remained perfectly still. The fields of Christian County were a landscape of repetitive beauty where the same tasks returned with the rising sun. There was the rhythmic sound of water being drawn from the well and the soft lowing of livestock in the barn as the morning mist began to lift from the hollows. Edgar moved through these routines with a quiet efficiency, while his thoughts often drifted toward things that others could not see. Those who knew him then remembered a child who was inward-looking and deeply kind, and someone who seemed to carry a heavy sense of responsibility for the well-being of others. He did not seek the loud games of the other children, but preferred the company of the woods and the quiet corners of the farm. The trees were his companions. In the stories that would later be told about those early years, there were moments when the ordinary life of a farm boy seemed to touch something unusual. One afternoon, while he was resting in a secluded clearing, it was said that he experienced a vision of a lady surrounded by a soft and radiant light. She spoke to him with a voice that was as gentle as the wind in the leaves, and she asked him what he most desired in his life. Edgar, with the simple sincerity of a child, replied that he only wanted to be helpful to others, and especially to children who were sick or in pain. The vision faded into the shadows of the woods and left him with a feeling of profound peace that he would carry for the rest of his days. It was a memory that felt as distant and dreamlike as the summer clouds, and he rarely spoke of it to anyone but his mother. His time in a local schoolhouse brought other accounts of a mind that worked in ways that were difficult to explain. There were stories of a young Edgar struggling with his spelling lessons until he decided to rest his head upon the book and close his eyes for a brief nap. When he awoke, it was said that he could visualize every page and every word as if the information had simply transferred into his mind while he slept. The scratch of graphite on slates and the murmur of other students faded away as he found a way to learn that was as effortless as breathing. These moments were not presented as spectacles, but as quiet occurrences in the life of a boy who was still just a child of the Kentucky soil. He remained a part of the world of hay and clover and the slow passage of time. There was another afternoon when a game of baseball ended with a stray ball striking him at the base of his spine. The impact was sharp, and he was taken home to rest while a strange heaviness settled over his mind. While he was in a state that was neither fully awake nor fully asleep, he began to speak to his parents in a voice that was clear and certain. He described the nature of his injury, and he told them exactly what kind of poultice should be made from the plants in the garden to help him heal. His mother followed the instructions, and by the next morning, the pain had receded and the clarity of the day had returned. It was an event that the family tucked away into their memories while the sun continued to rise over the rolling hills, and the seasons turned once more toward the harvest. Edgar did not grow up with the expectation of fame or the desire to be different from the men who worked the land around him. His ambitions were rooted in the faith of his community and the simple hope of being useful to those he loved. He saw the evening lamplight glowing in the windows of the farmhouse, and he felt the warmth of the hearth as the family gathered to rest after a long day of work. The smell of wood smoke drifted through the air, and the stars appeared one by one in the deepening blue of the sky. The questions of the future were not yet asked, and the mysteries of his own life were resting quietly beneath the surface of his daily routines. Everything was in its proper place. The fields were silent now. Edgar's childhood in the fields began to transition into the responsibilities of a young man as the summer of his 15th year arrived. The schoolhouse where he had spent so many afternoons with his books and slates was left behind as he completed the 8th grade, and the formal structure of his education came to a quiet end. It was not a sudden departure, but a gradual widening of his world into the practical needs of his family and the demands of the land. He spent his days working on his uncle's farm while the sun traced a slow arc across the Kentucky sky, and the repetitive rhythm of the work became a form of meditation. The work was steady. The physical weight of the tools and the steady pace of the chores provided a grounding influence even as his thoughts continued to wander toward the deeper questions of his faith and his purpose. He was a young man of few words, and he moved through the tasks of the day with a focused and gentle efficiency. The transition from the farm to the town of Hopkinsville brought a change in the sensory textures of his daily life. The smell of fresh hay and turned earth was replaced by the scent of old paper and printer's ink as he found work as a clerk in a local bookstore. The shop was a place of quiet shelves and tall stacks of volumes that reached toward the ceiling, while the light from the street filtered through the front windows in long and dusty beams. Edgar felt a natural affinity for the environment of books, and he handled the paper and the bindings with a sense of reverence. The room was quiet. He enjoyed the tactile experience of organizing the stock and the quiet interactions with the customers who came seeking information or a story to carry home. There was a comfort in the order of the shelves and the weight of the packages as he wrapped them in brown paper and tied them with bits of twine. He was surrounded by words, and he felt a quiet kinship with the history and the knowledge that rested within the covers of the books. During these years in Hopkinsville, Edgar's life began to be woven together with that of a young woman named Gertrude Evans. Their meeting was as quiet and unhurried as the town itself, and their connection grew through the simple shared experiences of Sunday church and evening walks. Gertrude was a person of deep patience and a gentle spirit, and she recognized something in Edgar that others might have overlooked. Their courtship was not a matter of grand gestures, but of steady presence in the exchange of letters that were folded and refolded until the paper became soft at the edges. Their love grew slowly. They spoke of their hopes for the future and their shared belief in the importance of a life lived with kindness and service. The engagement would last for many years while they waited for the right time to build a home of their own. It It was a promise that rested quietly in the background of their lives, like a steady light in a window. In 1898, the path of his work led him away from the familiar streets of Hopkinsville and toward the larger city of Louisville. He found a position with a book and stationery company, where he continued to work among the things he loved. The city was a place of different sounds and rhythms, with the rattle of carriages on the cobblestones and the distant whistle of trains arriving at the station. Edgar lived in a boarding house and spent his days moving through the routines of the business, while his thoughts often returned to the quiet hills he had left behind. The streets were often wet. He walked the rainy streets as the evening mist settled over the river and the lamps began to glow in the windows of the shops. The world was larger now, but his needs remained simple, and he continued to search for a place where he could feel truly useful. His father, Leslie, eventually invited him to join him in the work of selling insurance, and the two of them traveled together across the region. This new role required Edgar to be more outgoing and to engage with strangers in a way that was often difficult for his reserved temperament. He carried his sample cases through train compartments and across the thresholds of unfamiliar homes, while the landscape blurred past the windows of the railway cars. There were long hours of waiting and the repetitive patterns of the sales presentations, but he performed the work with the same quiet dedication he brought to everything else. He traveled many miles. He listened to the stories of the people he met, and he felt a deep sense of empathy for their worries and their needs. The tension between his private nature and the public demands of his work was a constant presence, but he bore it with a quiet grace. As he moved through his early 20s, Edgar Cayce appeared to be a young man, like many others who were seeking stability and a sense of direction. He was a son and a brother and a fiancé who worked hard and remained devoted to his faith and his family. The unusual experiences of his childhood had not disappeared from his memory, but they were tucked away like old letters in a drawer, while he focused on the practicalities of earning a living. He was a man of books and paper and leather shoes, and he found satisfaction in the small details of a job well done. He was still searching. The questions of what his life might become were still unanswered, and the potential for a different kind of service was still resting in the shadows. He was simply waiting for the next door to open, while the trains continued to arrive and the letters continued to be written. The world was moving forward at its own unhurried pace. Everything was quiet, and the promise of the future remained intact. The year 1900 arrived with a quiet shift in the trajectory of Edgar's life. He was 23 years old and working in the world of sales when a persistent cold began to settle into his chest and throat. The winter air was sharp. He found that his voice was growing thinner and more strained with every passing day, until it finally faded into a dry and labored whisper that no amount of rest could restore. Physicians in the area examined him and offered various treatments, but the silence remained as heavy and immovable as the Kentucky fog in the early morning. It was a time of forced stillness. He could no longer perform the work that required him to speak with customers, and he found himself retreating into a world where communication was limited to gestures and written notes on small scraps of paper. He felt the weight of the silence in the back of his throat, and he began to adapt to a life that was lived in a lower key, while he waited for a change that seemed increasingly distant. As the months of silence stretched on, Edgar turned toward a profession that did not require the use of his voice. He found a place within the cool and dim interior of a photographic studio where the work was performed with a steady hand and a keen eye for light and shadow. The room was quiet. He learned to handle the large wooden cameras and the heavy glass plates that captured the faces of the local townspeople in moments of frozen stillness. The air in the studio smelled of the sharp chemicals used for developing and the soft scent of the black velvet cloths that draped over the equipment to keep out the light. He spent hours in the dark room while the images gradually emerged from the chemical baths, like ghosts appearing in the silver and the gray. The work was precise. He enjoyed the tactile nature of the process and the way the world seemed to slow down whenever he adjusted the heavy curtains to catch the afternoon sun. He was a photographer now, and he found a sense of peace in the wordless interaction with his subjects as they sat for their portraits in the steady and patient light. In the spring of 1901, a man named Al Lane arrived in Hopkinsville with a background in hypnotism and a curiosity about the nature of Edgar's condition. He suggested that perhaps the loss of voice was not a purely physical ailment, but something that could be addressed through the power of suggestion and the quiet focus of a trance. Edgar was hesitant at first, but the desire to regain his voice and return to a more active life eventually led him to agree to the experiment. They met in a quiet room where the light was soft and the distractions of the outside world were held at a distance. The floorboards were old. Edgar lay down on a couch and folded his hands across his stomach while he focused on the rhythm of his own breathing and the steady sound of Lane's voice. He felt a deep sense of relaxation spreading through his limbs as he moved into a state that was neither fully awake nor fully asleep. The room became still. It was in this quiet state that the first recorded medical reading occurred as Edgar began to speak with a voice that was clear and certain and entirely free from the strain of the past year. During this trance session, Edgar spoke about his own body as if he were looking at it from a great distance, and he described the specific cause of his voice loss. He suggested that the problem was a matter of poor circulation in the throat, and he recommended a treatment that involved increasing the blood flow to the affected area through mental suggestion. Lane followed the instructions, and he watched as the skin of Edgar's neck and chest began to turn a deep and healthy red while he remained in his deep sleep. The air was cool. When Edgar finally awoke from the trance, he found that his voice had returned, and he was able to speak with the same clarity and strength that he had known as a younger man. The silence had been broken. It was a moment of profound relief for Edgar and his family, and it marked the beginning of a new and unexpected chapter in his life that would eventually touch the lives of thousands of people. Lane was deeply impressed by the accuracy and the detail of the information Edgar had provided while he was asleep, and he began to wonder if this ability could be used to help others. He asked Edgar if he would be willing to perform similar readings for people who were suffering from various illnesses and who had found no relief through traditional medical treatments. Edgar was initially reluctant to use his gift in such a public way, as he was a man of deep faith and a private nature who did not seek attention or acclaim. The world was curious. He worried about the implications of the trance work, and he wondered if it was truly in alignment with his religious beliefs and his desire to live a simple and useful life. He eventually decided that if the information could truly help those who were in pain, then he had a responsibility to continue the work even if he did not fully understand the source of the knowledge. The readings began. These early sessions were conducted with a quiet and methodical approach, while Lane acted as the conductor and Gertrude provided a steady and supportive presence in the background. Edgar would lie down and enter the trance state, while Lane would read the name and the location of a person who had requested a reading for their health. The room was peaceful. Edgar would then describe the physical condition of the individual with a level of medical detail that he did not possess in his waking life, and he would suggest treatments that range from herbal remedies to dietary changes and physical therapies. The results were often reported to be remarkably accurate, and many people found relief and healing through the suggestions provided while Edgar slept. He remained humble. He did not claim to have any special power or wisdom of his own, but he simply saw himself as a channel for information that was available to anyone who was willing to listen with an open heart. The news of these unusual readings began to spread through the community, and then further into the surrounding regions as people spoke of the young photographer who could see into the human body. Edgar continued to work in his studio during the day, while the trance sessions were reserved for the quiet hours of the evening when the work of the day was done. The lamps were lit. He would move from the world of glass plates and silver images into the world of the sleeping readings while the stars appeared in the wide Kentucky sky outside the window. He was a man living two lives that were woven together by a common thread of service and a quiet dedication to the well-being of others. He felt the weight of the responsibility, but he also felt a deep sense of purpose that he had been searching for during the years of his youth. The path was clear. Despite the growing attention, Edgar remained a person of simple habits and a deep love for the quiet routines of his home and his family. He enjoyed the smell of the evening air and the sound of the wind in the trees as he walked back to his house after a long day of work and study. The world was changing. He saw the arrival of the new century as a time of hope and possibility, and he felt a quiet optimism about the future, even as the mysteries of his own life continued to unfold. He was a husband and a father and a teacher of the Bible, and he found his greatest joy in the simple interactions of a life lived with kindness and integrity. He was resting now. The readings were a part of his life, but they did not define him as a man who was still rooted in the soil and the faith of his ancestors. Everything was in balance. As he closed his eyes each night, he felt the quiet satisfaction of a day spent in the service of others and the peace of a mind that was at rest. The silence of the night was not a burden, but a comfort that allowed him to recharge and prepare for the challenges and the opportunities of the morning. The stars were bright. He listened to the soft breathing of his family and the distant sounds of the town as it settled into sleep, while the mysteries of the universe waited for another day. He was a man of peace. The journey was continuing in a way that he could never have imagined, and he was ready to follow the path wherever it might lead, with a quiet heart and a steady spirit. The room was dark. He drifted into a deep and dreamless sleep, while the world outside continued its slow and patient turn toward the light. The quiet rhythms of the photographic studio provided a steady anchor for Edgar as the new century began to unfold with its own patient energy. He found a deep satisfaction in the way the light caught the dust motes in the air, and the way the heavy velvet curtains could be drawn to create a world of soft shadows and elegant lines. The wood was polished. He moved with a practiced grace around the large wooden cameras while the subjects sat in the tall chairs and waited for the brief flash of light that would capture their image for the years to come. The work was peaceful. It allowed him to remain connected to the community of Bowling Green while his mind remained focused on the practicalities of composition and development and the subtle textures of the paper. He was a man who appreciated the stillness of a well-composed portrait and the way a moment of time could be preserved in a chemical bath. The world was moving forward, but inside the studio, the pace was always unhurried and the light was always controlled. On a warm Tuesday in June of 1903, the long and patient engagement between Edgar and Gertrude Evans finally reached its fulfillment in a quiet wedding ceremony. The air was fragrant with the scent of early summer flowers, and the light was gold as they stood together and pledged their lives to one another after 6 years of waiting. The day was bright. They moved into a home where the rooms were filled with the simple comforts of a shared life and the sound of the wind in the trees outside the windows. Gertrude was a steady and calming presence who understood the unique nature of her husband's life, and she provided a foundation of support that would sustain him through the challenges that lay ahead. Their life was modest. They spent their evenings in the soft glow of the lamps while they read or talked about the events of the day and the quiet hope they held for their growing family. The house was peaceful. The arrival of their first son, Hugh Lynn, brought a new sense of joy and responsibility into the Cayce household as the sounds of childhood began to fill the rooms. Edgar found a particular delight in the small details of his son's growth, and he spent hours watching the boy play in the dappled sunlight of the garden. The grass was green. He saw his own childhood reflected in the curiosity and the energy of his son, and he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the stability and the love that surrounded them. There was a period of quiet grief when their second son, Milton Porter, passed away in infancy, and the house was heavy with the weight of a loss that was difficult to name. The rooms were silent. They leaned on their faith and on each other as they moved through the shadows of that time, and they eventually found a place of acceptance where the memory of the child was held with a gentle and reflective distance. Life continued to turn like the seasons. In 1904, Edgar opened his own photographic studio, and he became a fixture of the local business community where his skill and his kindness were well known. He took pride in the quality of his work, and he enjoyed the challenge of capturing the true character of the people who came to sit before his lens. The chemicals were sharp. He spent his afternoons in the dark room, while the images gradually emerged from the silver and the gray, and he felt a quiet satisfaction in the precision of the process. He adjusted the curtains to catch the perfect angle of the sun, and he calmed the children who were nervous about the flash of the powder and the stillness required for a clear picture. The work was steady. It provided a sense of identity that was separate from the unusual trance readings, and it allowed him to be seen as a man of practical skills and reliable character. He was first and foremost a photographer. The family moved to Alabama in 1909, where Edgar operated several studios in different communities and continued to build his reputation as a master of the craft. The landscape was different, but the work remained the same, and he found comfort in the familiar routines of the camera and the darkroom. The streets were wide. It was during a return visit to Hopkinsville that he met a homeopathic physician named Wesley Harrington Ketchum, who became deeply interested in the nature of the sleeping readings. Ketchum was a man of science and curiosity, and he began to conduct a series of tests to determine the accuracy and the source of the information that Edgar provided while he was in his trance state. The room was quiet. He watched as Edgar described the inner workings of the human body with a level of detail that seemed impossible for a man without medical training, and he became convinced that the ability was a genuine and significant phenomenon. The news began to travel. In October of 1910, a full-page article appeared in the New York Times with a headline that spoke of an illiterate man becoming a doctor while he was asleep. The national attention was sudden and overwhelming for a man who had spent his life seeking the quiet corners of the world and the simple routines of his faith and his family. The paper was crisp. Edgar felt a sense of embarrassment and a deep religious concern as he read the words that described him as a medical wonder and a prophet of the modern age. He worried about how this publicity would affect his standing in the church and his ability to live a life of quiet service to his neighbors. He did not seek the spotlight. He felt the weight of the public gaze, and he wondered if he could remain true to the simple values of his Kentucky upbringing while the world was demanding answers to questions he was not sure he could provide. He remained humble. Despite the growing fame and the requests for readings that began to arrive from every corner of the country, Edgar continued to return to his studio and the work of the camera. He found a sense of peace in the darkroom, where the only sound was the soft splashing of the chemicals, and the only light was the dim red glow of the safety lamp. The images were clear. He held the glass plates with a steady hand, and he watched as the faces of his subjects appeared in the silver, while the noise of the outside world faded into the background. He was a man of two worlds, but he found his greatest stability in the one where he could see the results of his labor in the physical form of a well-developed photograph. The work was a form of prayer. He closed the heavy door of the studio, and he felt the quiet satisfaction of a day spent in the pursuit of beauty and truth through the lens of his camera. As the evening light began to fade, he would walk back to his home, where Gertrude was waiting, and the lamp was already glowing in the window. The air was cool. They would sit together in the quiet of the porch and listen to the sounds of the night as the stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky and the world settled into sleep. The questions of the future and the mysteries of the readings were put aside for the moment while they enjoyed the simple presence of each other and the comfort of their shared life. He was a husband and a father and a photographer, and he felt a quiet sense of purpose in the life he had built through patience and integrity. The room was warm. Everything was in its proper place, and the journey was continuing with a steady and unhurried pace toward the next morning. He was at rest. Edgar returned once more to the familiar streets of Hopkinsville, where the shadow of the tall trees provided a welcome respite from the heat of the summer day. The town was unchanged. He found himself navigating a life where the camera lens and the trance state existed side by side in a quiet and steady balance. The move to Selma, Alabama in 1912 brought a new setting for his work as he established the Cayce Art Company among the brick buildings and the wide porches of the southern town. The air was warm. He spent his days capturing the expressions of the local families, while his mind often returned to the possibilities that lay within the information he provided during his sleep. He began to feel a growing conviction that the work should be used for the benefit of all people, and not just for the curiosity of a few. The dream of a hospital began to take a clearer shape in his mind as he imagined a place where the suggestions from the readings could be carried out with care and precision. He saw a light-colored building. He imagined a place with large open windows that allowed the fresh air to move through the quiet treatment rooms where patients could find the rest and the healing they sought. It was a vision that remained with him through the long hours of work and the quiet moments of the evening. The search for funding led him toward the wide and windswept plains of Texas, where the promise of oil seemed to offer a path toward the fulfillment of his dream. The year 1919 marked the beginning of a period defined by the sound of machinery and the smell of dust and grease under a vast and unyielding sky. The landscape was immense. He traveled the long roads between the oil fields and the small hotels while he worked to establish the Cayce Petroleum Company with a group of associates. The work was difficult. He spent his days reviewing maps and paperwork, while the wind rattled the windows of the temporary offices and the sun baked the dry earth of the drill sites. There were moments of hope as the equipment worked through the layers of rock and soil in search of the liquid wealth that would build his hospital. The machinery was heavy. When the oil wells remained dry, he did not allow the disappointment to take root in his heart, but he simply accepted the outcome as a part of the larger pattern of his life. He saw the failure as a clearing of the path that would eventually lead him toward the right destination. The dust settled. He returned his attention to the readings and to the people who were waiting for the information that only he could provide. The hospital remained the constant center of his thoughts as he moved through the different phases of his work and his travels. He could still see the light-colored building in his mind, with the sun shining on the broad porches, and the quiet library where the records of the readings could be stored and studied. The windows were open. He imagined the sound of the ocean or the wind in the pines providing a background of peace for those who came to stay within its walls. It was a place of order and kindness where the mysteries of the human body could be explored with patience and respect for the individual. The dream was a source of strength that allowed him to move through the disappointments and the delays with a quiet heart and a steady spirit. He knew that the right time would eventually arrive, and he was willing to wait while he continued to perform the readings for those who sought his help. The work was steady. He balanced the needs of the many with the responsibilities of his own family, and he found a sense of peace in the knowledge that he was doing what he could to be of use. He spent his days in Selma working at the Cayce Art Company, where the smell of the developer and the texture of the photographic paper provided a grounding influence. The studio was a place of familiar routines and predictable results that contrasted with the often unpredictable nature of the trance work. The chemicals were cool. He enjoyed the process of refining the images and the quiet interaction with the people who came to have their portraits taken in the soft light of the studio. The camera was steady. He adjusted the settings and the focus with a practiced hand while the world outside continued to move toward the future with its own hurried pace. He was a man who lived in the present moment while he kept his eyes on the horizon of his dream. The work was a way to support his family and to maintain a sense of connection with the ordinary life of the community he called home. He was a photographer and a neighbor and a friend. As he closed the ledgers and put away the maps from the Texas ventures, he felt a sense of closure that was as quiet and as final as the setting sun. The room was dark. He reached out and extinguished the lamp while the smell of the kerosene lingered in the air for a moment before fading into the silence. He was ready to rest. The questions of the day were put aside and the plans for the hospital were tucked away like a precious secret while he prepared for the stillness of sleep. He felt the weight of the day leaving his shoulders and the rhythm of his breathing becoming slow and steady in the dim room. The dream was still alive. He would wake in the morning and continue the search for the place where the light-colored building would finally rise from the earth to meet the sky. Everything was peaceful. The journey was moving forward with a patient and unhurried grace. The rhythm of the work began to shift as the autumn of 1923 brought a new and steady presence into the Cayce household. Gladys Davis arrived in September while the leaves were just beginning to turn and the air was growing crisp and clear in the early mornings. She was a young woman of focused attention and quick hands, and she brought a new level of order to the recording of the readings. The pencil moved quickly. She sat in a quiet chair with her shorthand pad ready while Edgar prepared to enter his trance state in the dim light of the room. The transition into sleep had become a familiar routine that was performed with a sense of reverence and care. Edgar would loosen his tie and remove his shoes before reclining on a simple couch while Gertrude took her place nearby to guide the session. The room was still. The only sound was the soft ticking of a clock and the distant murmur of the world outside the window as the questions were prepared for the sleeping man. It was a process of patient waiting and quiet observation that had been refined through years of practice and a deep commitment to the service of others. The routine of the reading followed a pattern that was as steady as the rising tide. Gertrude would speak in a low and calming voice as she gave the suggestion for Edgar to enter the deep sleep and to find the information that was being sought. The room became peaceful. Gladys waited with her pencil poised above the paper, while Edgar's breathing became slow and rhythmic, and his hands were folded gently over his abdomen. When the voice eventually came, it was clear and certain, and it seemed to carry the weight of a different kind of knowledge. The words were captured in shorthand with a precision that ensured every syllable was preserved for the records that would follow. The pencil moved steadily. Gladys would later transfer these marks to the keys of a typewriter, while the rhythmic sound of the typing filled the house with a sense of productive labor. The question was read, and the room became still while the answer was written. It was a ritual of documentation that transformed the fleeting words of the trance into a permanent archive of human experience and inquiry. In the late months of 1923, a man named Arthur Lammers arrived from Dayton with a background in publishing and a mind that was curious about the deeper mysteries of existence. He was a man of wide interests, and he began to ask questions that moved beyond the physical health of the body and into the nature of the soul and the history of the world. The subjects were expanding. He asked about the meaning of life and the possibility of reincarnation and the ancient civilizations that were said to have existed in the distant past. Edgar found himself speaking about things that he had never studied in his waking life, and he described the concept of Atlantis and the spiritual development of humanity through many lifetimes. The information was new. These sessions became known as life readings, and they opened a window into a landscape of thought that was as vast and as varied as the stars in the night sky. The work was growing. This expansion of the readings brought a period of deep reflection and internal conflict for Edgar, as he struggled to reconcile the trance statements with his own Christian faith. He was a man who read the Bible once for every year of his life, and he found the ideas of reincarnation and ancient myths to be challenging to his established understanding of the world. The questions were difficult. He spent long hours in the quiet of his study while he compared the transcripts of the readings with the verses of the scriptures he knew so well. He sought a path of integrity that would allow him to continue the work without compromising the beliefs that were the foundation of his character. The room was quiet. He eventually decided that he would judge the information not by its novelty, but by whether it encouraged a life of compassion and service and the deeper love for one's neighbor. He found that the core of the readings was consistent with the call to kindness, and he chose to continue the journey with an open heart and a steady spirit. The fruit was good. The documentation of the readings became a central focus of the household as the number of sessions grew and the correspondence from the public began to fill the mailbags. Gladys Davis was the keeper of the records, and she organized the transcripts with a meticulous care that would ensure their preservation for decades to come. The paper was crisp. Each session was assigned a number, and the details of the date and the location and the individuals involved were noted with a professional accuracy. The archive was expanding. These records were not presented as absolute truths, but as a collection of observations and suggestions that had been offered to those who sought help and guidance. The distinction was important. Edgar remained less interested in the title of a prophet than in the practical question of whether the advice could help a person find relief from pain or a sense of purpose in their daily life. He was a man of service. The physical sensations of the room during a reading were a study in stillness and focused energy. The linen curtains would stir slightly in the breeze, and the smell of the ink and the paper would mingle with the faint scent of the wood smoke from the hearth. The air was cool. Edgar lay in the center of this quiet world, while the questions of the distant strangers were brought to him through the voice of his wife. He was a bridge between the seen and the unseen, and he performed this role with a humility that allowed the work to speak for itself. The room was peaceful. He did not remember the details of what he said while he was asleep, and he would often read the transcripts with the same sense of wonder and curiosity as the people who had asked the questions. He was a student of his own gift. The records were a testament to a life spent in the pursuit of understanding the mysteries that lie beneath the surface of the ordinary day. As the day came to a close, Gladys would place the latest transcript into its proper place within the growing collection of files. The drawer was heavy. The sound of the metal sliding into place was a final and satisfying note that marked the end of the day's work and the completion of another record. The house was silent. Edgar would sit on the porch for a moment and watch the evening light fading over the trees while he felt the quiet satisfaction of a task performed with integrity and care. The world was at rest. The typewriter was covered, and the pencils were sharpened and waiting for the morning while the secrets of the trance were held safely within the pages of the transcripts. Everything was in order. The journey was continuing with a patient and unhurried rhythm that was as steady as the ticking of the clock in the hall. He was ready for sleep. The shift toward the coast began with a meeting that would change the physical landscape of Edgar's work and bring a long-held dream into the light of the day. Morton Blumenthal was a businessman from New York who had found a deep sense of value in the readings, and he offered the financial support necessary to establish a permanent home for the work. The plan was clear. In September of 1925, Edgar and Gertrude and their family packed their belongings and moved away from the rolling hills and the familiar shadows of the Kentucky woods. They traveled toward the east until the air began to change, and the scent of the inland forest was replaced by the sharp and salt-heavy breeze of the Atlantic Ocean. Virginia Beach was a world of shifting dunes and vast horizons, where the sky seemed to stretch forever over the restless blue of the water. The sand was white. Edgar felt the transition in the way the ground gave way beneath his feet and in the constant rhythmic sound of the waves that never truly ceased. It was a place of new beginnings. He walked along the shoreline and watched the foam dissolve into the sand while he imagined the light-colored building rising against the backdrop of the pines and the sea. The horizon was wide. The contrast between the sheltered valleys of his youth and the open exposure of the coast was a source of quiet reflection as the family settled into their new surroundings. The trees were different. Instead of the broad leaves of the oaks and the maples, there were the slender needles of the pines that whispered in the wind and the hardy shrubs that clung to the edges of the dunes. The light was different too. It reflected off the water with a brilliance that made the mornings feel sharp and full of possibility, while the sunsets painted the sky in long strokes of orange and violet. They lived in a house where the windows stayed open to catch the cooling breeze, and the sound of the ocean became the background to every conversation and every moment of rest. The water was steady. Edgar found a sense of peace in the vastness of the Atlantic, and he felt that the location was right for the work that was still to come. He spent his mornings walking near the water while the gulls circled overhead and the tide followed its ancient and unhurried path. The world was open. In 1927, the Association of National Investigators was formed to provide a structure for the study and the application of the readings and to oversee the development of the hospital. The goals were modest. They sought to explore the information with a scientific mind and a compassionate heart while maintaining the integrity of the source. The land was acquired. It was a site that overlooked the ocean where the ground was high and the air was always fresh and moving through the trees. Edgar and Gertrude visited the location often, and they watched as the first markers were placed and the outlines of the foundation began to appear in the sand. The wood was new. Construction began in 1928, and the sound of the hammers and the saws filled the air with a sense of purposeful energy that Edgar found deeply satisfying. He often stopped by the site to talk with the workers, and he sometimes used his own hands to help with the tasks he had learned during his years on the farm. The building grew. The completed hospital was a structure of grace and simplicity that reflected the vision Edgar had carried in his mind for so many years. It was a light-colored building with broad porches that wrapped around the sides and large dormer windows that looked out toward the horizon of the sea. The rooms were quiet. There were offices for the staff and the library where the transcripts were kept, and approximately 30 beds for the patients who would come seeking help. The interior was filled with the scent of fresh lumber and the soft light that filtered through the white curtains as they lifted in the breeze. It was a place of order. The hospital began its work around the turn of 1928 and 1929, and it brought together the insights of the readings with the care of medical and therapeutic professionals. The dream was real. Patients arrived from many places, and they found a sanctuary where their needs were met with patience and a deep respect for the individual journey toward health. The atmosphere was calm. Life at the hospital was defined by a quiet dedication to the principles of service and the study of the human spirit. The days began with the sound of the ocean and the soft light of the morning sun as it rose over the water. The routines were steady. There were periods of treatment and times for rest, and the shared meals were occasions for conversation and the exchange of ideas. Edgar continued to provide readings for those in the hospital, and for those who wrote from a distance, while the records continued to grow under the careful hand of Gladys Davis. The paper was clean. He felt a deep sense of gratitude as he moved through the halls of the building and saw the dream taking a physical form in the lives of the people who were finding relief and hope. The work was fulfilling. He was a man who had found his place beside the sea, and he felt the strength of the Atlantic supporting the weight of the responsibilities he carried. The tides were regular. The evening hours at the hospital were a time of particular beauty, as the lamps were lit and the shadows grew long across the porches. The air was cool. People gathered to listen to the sound of the waves and to watch the stars appear in the dark sky above the pines. The world was silent. There was a feeling of profound peace that seemed to emanate from the building itself and from the intentions of those who worked and lived within its walls. Edgar often sat on the porch and let the rhythm of the ocean match the rhythm of his own breathing as he looked out into the darkness. The water approached. It moved toward the shore with a steady and patient energy before softening and withdrawing back into the deep. The waves returned. It was a loop of movement and rest that had continued for ages and would continue long after the work of the day was done. The shore was firm. As the night deepened, the building became a place of total stillness, where the only movement was the soft flickering of the light and the gentle breath of the wind in the curtains. The rooms were dark. Edgar felt the presence of the ocean even when he could not see it, and he drew comfort from its vast and unchanging nature. He was at rest. The questions of the patients and the details of the administration were put aside for the hours of the night while the world settled into a deep and restorative sleep. The stars were bright. He knew that the morning would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but for now he was content to simply be a part of the quiet life beside the Atlantic. Everything was in balance. The journey had led him to this shore, and he was ready to follow the path, wherever it might lead, with a heart that was full of hope. The waves were slow. The halls of the Cayce Hospital were initially filled with a sense of quiet activity and the hopeful presence of those seeking a new path to health. The air was fresh. Patients moved through the bright corridors and rested on the broad porches, while the rhythmic sound of the Atlantic provided a steady background to their days of recovery. Toff worked with a gentle efficiency. Doctors and therapists followed the suggestions provided in the readings, while the library became a center for study and the preservation of the growing archive. It was a time of optimism where the light-colored buildings seemed to fulfill every promise that Edgar had carried in his heart for so many years. The rooms were warm. The dream was no longer a vision in the distance, but a physical reality that could be touched and experienced by everyone who entered its doors. The work was expanding. The establishment of Atlantic University in 1930 added another layer of purpose to the community at Virginia Beach, as students arrived to explore the deeper questions of the human mind and spirit. The books were new. The curriculum included psychology and religion and the study of the unusual phenomena that had defined Edgar's life for so long. The classrooms were filled with the sound of inquiry and the rustle of turning pages as the students and faculties sought to bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and modern understanding. The atmosphere was one of intellectual curiosity and spiritual seeking. Edgar found a particular joy in the presence of the young people and the way they approached the mysteries of the readings with an open and critical mind. The world was curious. For a brief period, the university and the hospital stood together as monuments to a grander hope for human development and the integration of body, mind, and spirit. The vision was complete. The arrival of the Great Depression brought a cooling shadow over the ambitious plans of the association as the financial foundations began to shift and the support from backers became uncertain. The world was changing. The strain of the economic downturn led to disagreements and a narrowing of resources that eventually made the continued operation of the hospital and the university impossible. The decisions were difficult. In 1931, the doors of the hospital were quietly closed, and the institution that had been the focus of so much labor and hope was brought to an end. The halls were empty. The furniture was covered in white sheets, and the equipment was packed into crates, while the silence of the building replaced the murmur of the patients and the staff. The rooms were cool. It was a period of transition that Edgar accepted with a patient and reflective distance while he watched the physical structures of his dream being set aside. The records were moved. Gladys Davis and the small group of dedicated associates carefully carried the boxes of transcripts and the filing cabinets from the library to a more modest setting, where the work could continue in a different form. The boxes were heavy. The archive was no longer housed in a grand building beside the sea, but it remained intact and protected as a testament to the years of service. The work was not lost. The formation of the Association for Research and Enlightenment in the summer of 1931 marked a shift toward a more personal and decentralized approach to the study of the readings. The focus moved away from large institutions and toward the creation of small study groups where people could gather in their own homes to explore the principles of patience and prayer and self-knowledge. The circles were small. This new phase was defined by the quiet exchange of ideas and the practical application of the readings in the context of everyday life. The light was soft. The legal challenges that arose during this time were handled with the same quiet dignity and lack of drama that defined the rest of Edgar's life. In 1931, there was a case in New York involving the laws surrounding fortune-telling, and later in 1935, there was an inquiry in Detroit regarding the practice of medicine without a license. These events were noted in the records, but they did not disrupt the steady flow of the work or the commitment of the people who found value in the readings. The rooms were still. Edgar answered the questions of the officials with a simple and direct honesty, and he continued to focus on the needs of the individuals who sought his help through their letters and their visits. The world was complicated. He remained a man of peace who did not seek conflict, and he was content to let the results of his work speak for themselves in the lives of those who had been healed or comforted. The path was narrow. The work of the ARE grew through the quiet dedication of the study groups and the steady correspondence that flowed into the Cayce home from every part of the country. The letters arrived daily. People wrote about their struggles and their hopes, and they found a sense of connection in the shared study of the lessons that had emerged from the years of trance readings. The material was organized into books and pamphlets that could be shared and discussed in the comfort of a living room or around a kitchen table. The tea was warm. The grand vision of the hospital had become the intimate reality of a community that was bound together by a common search for understanding and a desire to be of use to one another. The chairs were gathered. The shift from the public institution to the private study group allowed the work to sink deeper into the fabric of the lives it touched and to grow in a way that was as natural as the seasons. The seeds were planted. As the evening light settled over the modest homes where the study groups met, there was a sense of profound and enduring peace. The lamps were lit. Small circles of friends and neighbors sat together and read the words that had been captured by the shorthand of Gladys Davis and the typing of the office staff. The paper was worn. They spoke of cooperation and the importance of a spiritual ideal, while the sounds of the world outside were held at a distance. The room was cozy. There was no need for grand buildings or national headlines to validate the experience of a person who found a new sense of purpose or a moment of clarity in the quiet of a shared study. The heart was full. Everything was in its proper place, and the journey was continuing with a steady and unhurried grace that was as deep as the ocean and as quiet as the night. The work remained. Edgar himself found a new rhythm in this quieter phase of his life, as he focused on the needs of his family and the small community that surrounded him. The garden was growing. He spent his afternoons working in the soil and his evenings reading the Bible and the letters that came in the mail, while the ocean continued its steady pulse beyond the trees. The air was cool. He was a man who had seen his greatest dream shrink in size only to find that its influence had become more profound in its smaller and more personal form. The rooms were filled. He enjoyed the visits from his sons and the presence of his friends, and he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the stability and the love that defined his daily existence. The house was peaceful. The questions of the future were resting, and the mysteries of the past were held in the archive, while the present moment was a source of complete and total rest. The light was golden. The night was approaching with its own slow and patient energy as the world outside the window settled into sleep. The stars were bright. Edgar listened to the soft breathing of his family and the distant sound of the waves as they moved toward the shore and then withdrew back into the deep. The water was constant. He felt the weight of the years leaving his shoulders, and the rhythm of his own breath matching the quiet pulse of the world around him. The dream was resting. He was a man who had followed a path that was often difficult to understand, but he had done so with a steady heart and a commitment to the service of others. The room was dark, everything was in balance, and the journey was moving forward with a grace that was as unhurried as the turning of the earth. He was at rest. The silence was a comfort. The later years of the 1930s brought a period of deepening stability to the life of the Cayce family as they settled into the quiet routines of their home in Virginia Beach. The garden was thriving. Edgar found a profound sense of peace in the physical labor of the earth, where he spent his afternoons tending to the rows of vegetables and the flowers that bloomed under the coastal sun. He moved with a slow and deliberate pace through the garden paths while the scent of the salt air mingled with the smell of damp soil and green leaves. The work was restorative. It allowed him to maintain his connection to the simple realities of the seasons, while his public life continued to grow in ways that were often complex and demanding. He remained a man of deep faith, who found strength in his daily study of the Bible and his role as a teacher in the local church community. The light was soft. He was a husband and a father and a neighbor who was respected for his kindness and his willingness to listen to the concerns of those around him. The days were long. Everything was in its proper place, and the rhythm of the household was defined by the steady pulse of the ocean and the quiet dedication to the work that filled the archive. In 1940, the physical space for the work was expanded through the addition of an office and a library and a fireproof vault that were built onto the family residence. The concrete was thick. This new space was designed to provide a secure home for the thousands of transcripts and records that had been collected over the decades of trance sessions. The air was cool. Gladys Davis oversaw the organization of the filing cabinets and the shelves where the history of so many lives was preserved in the form of typed pages and shorthand notes. The drawers were heavy. Edgar took a quiet pride in the preservation of the material, and he often spent time in the library reviewing the records or writing letters to those who sought his guidance. The room was quiet. The vault provided a sense of permanence and protection for the information, while the large windows of the office allowed the light of the afternoon to fill the room with a warm and golden glow. The paper was safe. It was a place of reflection and study where the mysteries of the past and the questions of the present could be explored with a sense of order and care. The walls were firm. The variety of the questions that arrived in the Daily Mail was a testament to the wide range of human experience and the deep search for meaning that defined the lives of so many people. The envelopes were many. There were requests for help with physical ailments and chronic conditions that had found no relief through traditional medicine, and there were questions about family relationships and career choices. The handwriting varied. Some wrote about their dreams and the strange visions they experienced in the night, while others sought information about the ancient civilizations of Atlantis or the spiritual development of the soul through many lifetimes. The ink was dark. Edgar approached every request with the same level of concern and humility, regardless of whether the person was a stranger from a distant city or a neighbor from down the street. The questions were diverse. He saw himself as a channel for information that could help an individual find a sense of balance and purpose in their daily life, and he performed the readings with a quiet dedication to the ideal of service. The records grew. The publication of the book titled A Search for God in 1942 marked a significant milestone in the development of the study groups and the spiritual work of the association. The pages were crisp. This material was the result of years of collaborative study by a local group in Norfolk that had sought to apply the principles of the readings to their own lives and their search for a deeper connection with the divine. The work was shared. It emphasized the importance of prayer and meditation and the practical application of spiritual ideals in the context of ordinary human relationships. The words were gentle. During the same year, a journalist and author named Thomas Sugrue published a sympathetic biography of Edgar titled There is a River, which brought a renewed level of public attention to his life and his gift. The book was popular. It presented the story of the sleeping prophet with a sense of warmth and understanding that resonated with readers who were seeking hope and clarity in a world that was increasingly defined by conflict and uncertainty. The narrative was flowing. The arrival of 1943 brought a dramatic increase in the volume of requests for readings as a result of several magazine articles that featured Edgar's work and the stories of those who had been helped. The mailbags were heavy. A feature in Coronet magazine particularly caught the attention of the public, and the small office in Virginia Beach was soon overwhelmed by the flood of correspondence that arrived from every part of the country. The stamps were colorful. Many of these letters came from families who were struggling with the anxieties and the losses of the Second World War, and who sought information about their loved ones serving in the military overseas. The voices were urgent. Mothers wrote with questions about the health and the safety of their sons, and fathers sought guidance on how to support their families during a time of rationing and sacrifice. The paper was thin. Edgar felt the weight of these requests in a very personal way, and he often spent long hours in the trance state, attempting to provide comfort and hope to those who were waiting for his words. The pressure was constant. The emotional toll of the wartime requests began to affect Edgar's health, as he pushed himself to perform more readings than his own body could comfortably sustain. The warnings were clear. The information provided in his own readings had often suggested that he should limit the number of sessions and allow himself more time for rest and recovery, but the needs of the people seemed too great to ignore. The tea was cooling. He worked through the exhaustion and the growing sense of fatigue, while the sound of the distant wartime radios filled the air with the news of the battles and the movements of the armies. The world was heavy. He saw the suffering of the families as a call to service that required him to give everything he had, even if it meant risking his own well-being. The fog was thick. He moved through the house with a slower step, and his voice became quieter as the months of the war continued to turn like a wheel of fire and shadow. The exhaustion was deep. In September of 1944, the strain finally reached a breaking point, as Edgar suffered a stroke that left him weakened and unable to continue the work of the readings. The room was still. The house that had been filled with the sound of the typewriter and the murmur of the trance sessions became a place of profound and restorative silence. The light was fading. He was cared for by Gertrude and his sons and the dedicated staff who had been his companions for so many years, and they provided him with the sanctuary of peace as the autumn light settled over the coast. The blankets were warm. He spent his days resting in the quiet of his room and looking out toward the pines and the ocean, while the correspondence remained in the trays and the records vault remained closed. The journey was slowing. He was a man who had given his life to the service of others, and he was finally allowed to rest within the care and the love of those who knew him best. The air was cool. The work that had defined his existence for more than 4 decades was now resting in the files and the archive, while the world outside continued its slow and patient turn toward the end of the year. The office was quiet. The typewriter sat beneath its cover, and the pencils remained in their holders, while the sounds of the ocean provided the only rhythm in the stillness of the house. The drawers were shut. Edgar lay in the quiet of the afternoon and felt the weight of the years leaving his shoulders as he drifted into a state of peace that was deeper than any trance he had ever known. The questions were silent. He was a man of the Kentucky hills and the Virginia coast who had followed a path of mystery and service with a heart that was full of kindness and a spirit that was steady and true. The room was dark. Everything was in its proper place, and he was allowed to sleep without another question while the stars appeared one by one in the deepening blue of the sky. The silence was complete. Edgar returned to the familiar shores of Virginia Beach in November of 1944, while the autumn was fading into the deep and patient stillness of winter. The sky was pale. He rested within the comfort of his home, while the cold wind moved through the branches of the pines, and the ocean continued its steady and rhythmic pulse beyond the windows. The blankets were soft and heavy upon his bed. He spent his days in a state of quiet reflection, while the sounds of the household were muffled and gentle like the falling of the snow. The work of the readings had come to a natural end, and he found a profound peace in the presence of his family and the familiar textures of the room he knew so well. He was a man who had completed his long journey of service, and the air was cool. On the 3rd day of January in 1945, the morning arrived with a clarity that was sharp and bright as the sun rose over the Atlantic for the final time in Edgar's life. The room was peaceful. He passed away at the age of 67 while the world outside was held in the silent grip of winter, and the archives of his work remained safe within the fireproof vault. Gertrude followed him less than 3 months later, as their long and faithful partnership reached its quiet conclusion in the softness of the spring. They were buried in Riverside Cemetery among the rolling hills of Hopkinsville, where the memories of their youth were woven into the landscape of the Kentucky soil. The journey had returned to its beginning, and the grass was green. The preservation of the work was carried forward by Hugh Lynn and Edgar Evans and Gladys Davis, who understood the immense value of the records they had helped to create through the decades. The archive was vast. It contained more than 14,000 recorded readings that spoke to the deepest questions of the human heart and the eternal search for a meaningful existence. The debate over the meaning and the accuracy of the information continued to unfold, while the ARE grew into a global community of seekers and students of the spirit. The papers were handled with a quiet reverence, and the legacy of the man known as the Sleeping Prophet was not found in the national headlines. It was found in the quiet moments when a person found comfort in the words he had spoken while he slept. The service was enduring. As we look back at the life of Edgar Cayce, we see a man who remained a simple photographer and a devoted Sunday school teacher. Even as he walked a path that was filled with mystery and wonder, he was a bridge. He did not seek to claim any special authority, but he simply offered what he had to anyone who came to him with a sincere desire for understanding. The questions were resting now. Whether he was a man of extraordinary foresight or a channel for a deeper and universal wisdom remains a matter of individual reflection while we listen to the silence of the night. The stories are complete. We are left with the enduring image of a man who lay down and closed his eyes so that he might find an answer for a stranger while the room was still and the heart was kind. The historical narrative now begins to dissolve gently into the quiet reality of your own resting body and the absolute stillness of the present moment. Your breathing is slow. You can feel that the weight of the day has completely left your shoulders as you settle deeper into the warmth and the familiar comfort of your bed. The blankets are secure and protective. The memory of the Kentucky fields and the Virginia shore is fading into a soft and dreamless state where the only thing that matters is the rhythm of your own heart. The room is dark. There is nothing that needs to be decided tonight, and there are no questions that need to be answered as the world outside continues its turn, while the darkness is kind and the shadows are soft. You can imagine the archive at Virginia Beach, where the pages of the readings rest in the absolute silence of the vault, while the pines whisper in the wind outside. The paper is still. The work of a lifetime is held in a place of peace and protection, while the mysteries of the universe continue to unfold in their own unhurried and perfect time. Your hands are relaxed and your jaw is soft as you surrender to the deep and restorative sleep that is waiting for you in the center of the night. The journey is over. Everything is in its proper place, and the peace of the room is absolute and unchanging, like the stars that watch over the earth while the night is long. Beyond the window, the Atlantic keeps breathing in the dark.